Gabby, Petito and Brian Laundrie. Part 13. Laundrie, Lonesome, Lash out. Hello, I'm Hg Tudor. As part of enabling you to understand what has actually been going on in many aspects of the case involving the deceased Gabby Petito and her on-the-run former fiancé, Brian Laundrie, I've been examining certain aspects of the case and interpreting it for you through the lens of narcissism. This also extends people's knowledge of narcissism with a real-life example, which is critical to aiding people's understanding. It's important to understand that I have made the assessment about Mr. Laundrie from an extensive range of material evidencing his behaviour over a sustained period of time. I have looked at video footage, reportage, Instagram postings, YouTube videos, information that has been provided, and having assessed that most carefully with a high evidential threshold, applying the relevant criteria that I use, I established that he is a narcissist, and I will be explaining to you presently his school and cadre to aid your further understanding. It's important to realise that once that analysis has been concluded, we can then look at that individual's behaviours through the prism of narcissism to interpret what's actually going on. This is crucial because a non-narcissist and a narcissist can engage in similar behaviours. However, there is a distinguishing factor as to what motivates them. So take, for example, an empathic person who buys their neighbour some flowers to say thank you for looking after my cat whilst I've been on holiday. What has motivated that individual to do it? Well, we know that they're empathic, which means they have emotional empathy. They're not manipulating their neighbour. Their moral compass, their empathic trait of decency dictates it's right and proper to say thank you for somebody doing a favour for me, and therefore I bought this person a bouquet of flowers by way of thanks. The motivation is driven by their emotional empathy. What if a narcissist were to buy a bouquet of flowers for the neighbour to say thank you by reason of them looking after the narcissist's cat whilst they've been on holiday, say for 2 weeks in Aruba? Well, if it was an unaware narcissist, the individual actually believes that they are saying thank you because they're a kind and decent and considerate person. But because we know that they are a narcissist, we know that their behaviours are being unconsciously driven by their prime aims. And therefore, this benign act of what is in effect bribery, by providing the bouquet, asserts control over the neighbour, who will be a non-intimate secondary source, draws fuel from them by way of their response, and contributes to the residual benefit of the facade management of being seen to be a decent person. But the narcissist doesn't know this. It's what the narcissism is doing for them. An aware narcissist knows full well that they're only doing it to manipulate their neighbour, to make themselves look good, and for the purposes of asserting control over them. They know that they don't really mean the thanks that they offer. The aware narcissist knows that they don't really care. And indeed, of course, there would be some narcissists that wouldn't purchase a gift at all, because their narcissism would operate with such a sense of entitlement, and perhaps the absence of facade management, that they don't see anything wrong in taking the time and money of that individual feeding their cat, and then basically taking the cat back and not issuing even a word of thanks, or a begrudging thanks without offering any gift. So the important distinction here is that when we've established over a range of behaviours over a sustained period of time, not a one-off instance, one-off instances are merely indicators and they're not determinative. So once we've established that an individual is a narcissist, we can look at their behaviours through the prism of narcissism. Accordingly, taking that into account, I have looked at a recent report provided by a tourist that was reported in the New York Post. An article by Jackie Sallow reports, tourist claims he saw mad Brian Laundrie alone in bar just prior to Gabby Petito's disappearance. A Louisiana man on a road trip through Montana said he had a strange encounter in a bar with a man he believes was Brian Laundrie, just 1 day before his girlfriend, Gabby Petito, was last reported seen alive. Hunter Manis, 44, said he saw the man who resembled Laundrie wearing a hoodie and drinking by himself at the end of the bar on the night of August 26th at Bullwinkle Saloon in West Yellowstone. He was just mad at the world, it seemed like, Mannes told the Post. I didn't pay attention to him, other than that he and this other couple were the only ones in there, he said. But then he and a doctor friend started talking to the couple, another physician and her partner. The conversation got into hunting and guns and politics, Mannes said, adding that when he realised that the man had been listening. The guy just looked mad, and then at some lull in the conversation, he said, "Stupid Southerners and fucking Republicans." Mannes said his friend shot back, "Stupid Southerners? She and I both have doctor in front of our names. Do you?" What has happened in this interaction, then? It's been reported on. Well, assuming this is accurate and it was Brian Laundrie, of course, he's there on his own. His fuel levels may be relatively low at this juncture. People talking to one another but not him, in effect, wounds him. He's no right to be involved in the conversation. But of course his narcissism requires fuel, and therefore it needs to galvanise Brian Laundrie into taking steps to get that fuel in order to sustain him. Accordingly, through his sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, lack of boundary recognition, it causes him to feel in a particular way and think in a particular way, so he's motivated to interject into the conversation. Given the type of narcissist that he is, it's not a particularly evolved response. It lacks charm. It lacks any particular wit or warmth or engagement that a more sophisticated narcissist would be able to muster up. Instead, his narcissism selects provocation and insult. And therefore, he interjects in the conversation by saying, "Stupid Southerners and fucking Republicans." It works because the friend responds, giving challenge fuel by saying, "Stupid Southerners, she and I both have doctor in front of our names. Do you?" Accordingly, as a consequence of this provocation, which was done to draw fuel, Laundrie gets his fuel. Admittedly, it's from a tertiary source, so it's not particularly potent, and in those circumstances, it's a one-off hit. But the amount is sizable because it's an in-person interaction, which is where we get the most fuel from. The report continues with the individual saying, "I kind of laughed and said, 'Well, where are you from?' And he, Laundrie, said, 'New York.' Mannes said, and I said, 'Okay, New York.' And he said, 'I have a name. It's Brian.' I said, 'Let me ask you this, New York. What did you expect to find in a small mountain town in the middle of nowhere, Montana? Did you expect to find a bunch of Democrats?' Mannes said they returned to their conversation, but they got a weird vibe from the man the rest of the evening. He was overly invested in our conversation. We felt watched," Mannes said. "He wasn't talking to the bartenders. He was there alone. It just stood out as odd." What has happened there is that Mannes involved himself in the conversation. His questions were less challenging. He provided fuel. And therefore, the interaction enabled Laundrie to receive fuel from these tertiary sources. The fact that Mr. Mannes believes that he was overly invested in the conversation is indicative of the absence of boundary recognition that Laundrie has as a narcissist. It also means that his narcissism was basically looking for a moment to cause him to interject so that he could provoke a reaction and draw fuel from them. The fact that he was on his own, the fact that there was very little other people in the bar, the fact that he wasn't talking to the bartenders, meant that because they were talking amongst themselves, it in effect wounded him, and therefore his narcissism moved him to provoke. Of course, you would look at this and think, well, why would they talk to him? They don't know him. And indeed, why should they? But remember, from the perspective of Brian Laundrie, driven by his narcissism of which he's unaware, he believes that he should be able to comment upon them. You'll have come across that with narcissists who comment upon things where you think, who invited you to make comment? Who asked you to stick your nose in? And that's because the narcissist has no sense of boundary recognition, no accountability for the behaviour, a sense of entitlement, and of course, those factors allow the narcissist to assert control by being involved and drawing fuel. The report continues with Manis said his friend also confided in him that he thought he had that serial killer luck. Manis said they talked about how odd the encounter was a few more times before parting ways on the trip. But when the news of Petito's disappearance made headlines, his friend called him. She said, "That's the crazy guy from the bar," he said. Manis said he watched body camera footage of Laundrie and Petito taken by authorities responding to an alleged domestic incident in Moab, Utah. "Just the way he carried himself and I heard his voice, it was him," Manis said. A manager for the West Yellowstone bar didn't respond to requests for comment. Manis, a former deputy in Southern Parish, LA, said he contacted the FBI about the sighting and spoke with them for about 45 minutes. "How many people named Brian from New York who look exactly like him are in the middle of nowhere at the bar," he said. Petito was reportedly last seen alive on August the 27th at a restaurant in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, about 120 miles from the bar where Manis believes he saw Laundrie. This is just a minor interaction, but again it provides you with a useful opportunity to further your understanding. Brian Laundrie is on his own. His fuel levels are dropping. He has not got any appliances that he can interact with in a meaningful fashion to receive fuel. And, as the day goes on, his fuel level drops, getting lower and lower and lower. And that's when the presence of the chasm is felt. The emptiness that resides within the narcissist makes itself felt. He starts to feel belligerent. He starts to feel even more paranoid. Are those people talking about him? There's an itch that needs to be scratched, but he can't, and he doesn't know what it is. And then it gets worse as the fuel levels plummet. He becomes more paranoid. He finds that there is a now impending sense of doom. Something isn't right. It makes him feel antsy, anxious, putting him on tenterhooks. And his narcissism, in order to alleviate those sensations for him, motivated him to interact into the conversation to try and receive some dollops of fuel. That was the provocation. He asserted control by having a conversation with them and receiving some small amounts of fuel back from them, which would have gone part way to alleviating the sensations that he was experiencing. Of course, where he went to next is a matter of speculation. But the fact that he lashes out with strangers demonstrates a lack of emotional empathy, no boundary recognition, his plummeting fuel levels, the need to assert control, and the need to recover fuel. And this little interaction, reported in the New York Post, is another excellent insight into the way that Brian Laundrie was functioning. It's also noteworthy of this. What is it that motivated him to kill Miss Petito? I will, of course, be commenting about that. But ahead of that, you need to keep in mind two factors which will have impinged upon it: the question of control and dropping fuel levels. I'm Hg Tudor. Thank you for listening.